A note before we begin. This episode contains disturbing crimes against children. Please take care. Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking that they change laws, change society, or even earn the label Crime of the Century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. When her alarm rang at 6 a.m. that Monday morning, 18-year-old Carla Wilhad awoke to a crisp day in the woods that promised to be hotter than anyone would have liked. It was June 13th, 1977, and Carla was trying to get to the group showers before any of her fellow camp counselors. The early bird gets the hot water. She saw that her two tent mates, also camp counselors, were still dozing as she headed out. It was Carla's first year as a counselor at Camp Scott, the Girl Scout camp located a bit east of Tulsa. Some 140 girls had arrived the day before and had been sorted into their respective units, and, as always, that evening had been filled with songs and getting-to-know-yous. For some of the younger girls, it was their first time sleeping away from home, and more than a few had needed a bit of mothering to help them get over their homesickness. Denise Milner was one of those reluctant campers. The 10-year-old had been excited about the trip into the densely wooded Oklahoma hills until she wasn't. When the girls were being loaded onto buses in Tulsa, she told her mother she didn't want to go. Her mother told her to give it a chance. "If you want to come home tomorrow, of course we'll come and get you." Denise said okay, but when she got to the rough-hewn, buggy place, she had asked a counselor if she could call home right away so she didn't have to spend the night. She was talked out of that. "It'll get better," she was told. Denise had been placed in the Kiowa unit. All the units were given Native American tribal designations, and she'd been assigned to tent number 7 along with 2 other girls who seemed nice enough. The tents usually held 4 campers apiece, but one of the Kiowa tribe had been mistakenly assigned to the Cherokee tribe without anyone really noticing. It was not a good assignment for Denise, a hesitant city girl. Tent number 7 was kind of isolated from the rest and wasn't in clear view of the counselors' tents. That first night, during a brief thunderstorm, she wrote a letter to her family. Here's a dramatic reading of it from a documentary called Someone Cry for the Children.
Dear Mom, I don't like camp. It's awful. The first day it rained.
I have 3 new...
The little girl signed in a wobbly cursive, "Your loving child, Denise Milner." The next morning, as counselor Carla hustled toward the latrines, she noticed something that didn't look right. Here's Carla explaining it in another documentary.
But as I was walking out of the unit, I kind of looked to my right because I saw something in the road. I saw a couple of sleeping bags, and I thought, wow, I better pick them up, and get them unrolled and everything so that they can dry out. And as I walked closer, I could actually see the figure of a young girl lying partially on the road and maybe partially off of the road, and just unclothed. And the closer I got, I could just see that this young girl was dead.
The child would later be identified as Denise Milner. She never got to send the letter she had written. It was found the next morning alongside evidence of something so brutal it would consume an entire state, ignite a courtroom war, and leave families begging for justice. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Hims.
Let's be real. A lot of guys notice something's off in the bedroom and just wait.
Blame it on stress, bad sleep, getting older. But at some point, you stop making excuses and actually think about doing something.
And the good news is, doing something has never been easier.
HIMSS connects you with licensed healthcare providers completely online. No awkward appointments, no pharmacy lines. You fill out a simple online intake, a provider reviews your information, and if treatment is right for you, it ships directly to your door in discreet packaging.
That includes sildenafil. That's the generic for Viagra, available through HIMSS at up to 95% less than the brand name version. And if that's not the right fit, there are other treatment options available too, so you can figure out what actually works for you.
It's straightforward, it's transparent, and it's designed to make getting care feel easy.
To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/COTC. That's hims.com/COTC for your free online visit. hims.com/COTC. Not available in all 50 states.
Prescription required. See website for details and important safety information. Sildenafil is a generic version of Viagra. Viagra is a registered trademark of Viatris Specialty LLC. HIMSS is not affiliated with or endorsed by Viatris.
After Carla Wilhap made the gruesome discovery in the roadway, she ran back to her tent to wake her two tent mates. Dee Elder ran to get the camp director, Barbara Day. Susan Emery followed Carla back to confirm what she had said she saw. Susan touched the two bags in the road, only to find that each contained something that was horrifyingly shaped like a small body. Barbara rushed to the site with her husband, Richard, an emergency room nurse. They reached the little girl amid the pile of sleeping bags and checked in vain for vital signs. She was nude from the waist down. She was still warm. No one thought to unzip the other two bags to see if anyone might still be alive. Day contacted the nearest authority she could, a forest ranger who told her to call the police. She called the Girl Scout authorities first, then the Mays County Sheriff's Office. Day then asked the few counselors at the scene to do a quick tent check to see who was missing. In the Kiowa unit, tent number 7 was empty. There was a lot of blood on the floor, sleeping bags and mattress covers were gone, and dark red stains were smeared on the canvas tent opening flaps, weak protection against the carnage that had been wrought within. The first officer on the scene was Oklahoma Highway Patrolman Harold Berry, who lived close to the camp and, per Day's orders, had been allowed past the camp's gates only after every girl in camp had been rousted away by the camp bell and rushed toward the Great Hall for breakfast. The girls in the Kiowa unit had been carefully rerouted away from where the bodies were. They'd been told they had to go the long way as a kind of punishment for having stayed awake giggling so long after curfew the night before. The camp was big enough, rugged enough, and densely forested enough that whatever was happening down by the pathway was now out of view. Shortly after Barry arrived, Pete Weaver, the sheriff of Mays County where the camp was located, showed up. He brought along Michael Wheat, the town's weekly newspaper photographer, to help document everything in sight, on the path, around the path, and in the tent, where it looked as if the attacks had occurred. He was accompanied as well by the county coroner, Dr. Donald Collins. The word had gone out quickly in the small town of Locust Grove, where the camp was located. It went out to all of Mays County and was already making its way to Tulsa and Tulsa County and state agencies based there. Something terrible had happened at Camp Scott. By the time the girls finished breakfast, the Kiowas were gathered up to start early morning crafts. Counselors assumed they would need to be questioned, and the rest of the girls set out on a major morning hike away from what was now becoming a law enforcement convention gathered there at the end of Cookie Trail Road. Even the Mays County District Attorney Sid Wise was on hand. Day said that by 10 a.m., she knew the scene was becoming a bit of a circus that she was quickly losing control of. Helicopters were starting to circle overhead. She quickly made arrangements to get the hundreds of campers back home before they learned what had happened. Truth was, even police didn't know the full picture at that point. It wasn't until 10:45 that morning that an Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agent arrived to find that, God Almighty, what is wrong with you people? No one had unzipped the other sleeping bags. Not even the coroner had taken a look inside the little red plaid cocoons to see what they contained. This was not a great start for the cops. Inside were 2 more little girls, 8-year-old Lori Farmer and 9-year-old Michelle Gousset. Both had blunt force trauma wounds to the head that looked to be from the notched end of a crowbar or a hammer. The 2 girls each had been dead for hours. Both had been sexually assaulted, but most likely that had happened after they were already dead. Michelle and Denise had been bound and gagged. Lori had not. All 3 were now bundled back up and sent directly to Tulsa to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. Scattered around the bodies was a collection of items that would consume investigators for years. That included a red and white box flashlight that had been rigged with plastic garbage bags and taped to allow only a pinprick of light to escape it. Also found on the scene were some cotton rope, a roll of black duct tape, and some discarded black tape. In the woods near the bodies were a pair of women's glasses, an eyeglass case, and something called a guitar capo, which is a bar that clamps on a guitar strings for different musical effects. The attention of the area, and soon the nation, was quickly turning toward Little Locust Grove. Newspaper and TV reporters arrived and waited at the camp gate to be given information. No one in authority had talked to them yet. They'd arrived to the scene because, well, in a small town, that many squad cars and circling helicopters doesn't go unnoticed. The same buses that had brought the girls to camp the day before finally arrived to fetch them to bring them back home. Only after that did anyone official try to clarify the situation to the press. No one did the same for the confused campers, who only realized something was horribly amiss when their buses passed the crowded front gate. The girls' parents had been told to come get them at the Girl Scout headquarters in Tulsa, but hadn't been told why. They waited anxiously as early word got to them that 3 unidentified Girl Scouts had been slaughtered as they slept. The parents of the dead girls had been notified, but the parents of the other girls were in the dark as they waited for their children to exit the buses. The Camp Scott staff stayed behind, mostly to comfort Carla, Susan, and Dee, who were repeatedly asked by various agencies what they had heard or seen that night. Carla explained to everyone that she had had to get up a few times to quiet the still excited campers and make sure everyone was in bed asleep.
But later that night, I woke up, I heard a noise, and it wasn't like anything I had ever heard before, nothing that I could identify as any kind of animal. And the noise was coming from an area near our unit. Sort of, there's a little bit of a road that goes out away from the unit, and that's where I heard the noise. So I started to go over and investigate and just see if I could shine my flashlight and see what it was.
She explained that every time she got closer to the sound, it stopped. She finally decided it was just some critter and went back to bed. That was around 1:30 or 2 in the morning. The specific sound is something she can still recall almost 50 years later. Oklahoma Governor David Boren promised reporters that the state would spare nothing to find the killer or killers. A few days later, he would deploy the Oklahoma National Guard to help. But by the end of that first day, Sheriff Pete Weaver already had singled out a suspect. It was a man he had been hunting for 4 years already. A man who had been convicted of rape and kidnapping involving 2 Tulsa women and an assortment of burglaries. A man who had broken out of Weaver's own jail twice and was now on the lam. That man's name was Gene Leroy Hart. He was a local man, a member of the Cherokee Nation on whose land the scout camp stood, a kid who had once been a football hero at the local high school. As an adult, though, Hart had twice publicly embarrassed Weaver by escaping the jail with the help of Ella Mae Buckskin, his mother, who, on one occasion, had slipped him a nail file and a cake. The autopsies hadn't been finished yet, neither had the canvassing of the camp. Plaster casts of shoe prints weren't yet dry, but Weaver was sure. He was also not very comforting to the region, who wanted some assurance they and their children were safe from this man. On the contrary, he wanted them to know they weren't. That night, the nation heard about the crime from, among others, ABC News anchor Barbara Walters.
In Oklahoma, a manhunt underway. 3 Girl Scouts aged 8, 9, and 10 were discovered beaten to death today, and at least one of them was sexually molested.
The 3 little girls would be lumped together for eternity, and because they were so young, had little backstory. But they were not just girls who had been denied their chance at being women. They were girls who had carved out something real in the lives of those who knew them, something quite promising already. Denise had taught herself to read and write and do math by the age of 4. She sang in her church choir and dearly loved to tap dance. Lori, just a week from turning 9, was the oldest of 5 children and was close to each of her siblings, helping her mother, Sherry, to raise them. She was so bright, she had skipped a grade in school. Michelle was a terrific athlete and had decided to grow African violets in her spare time. She'd gone to great pains to make sure her father took care of them when she was away at camp. Their deaths shouldn't define them, but for a lot of people, that's all they know about these 3 little girls. The day after the murder, Tulsa medical examiner Neil Hoffman told the media that Michelle had been bound with 1/8-inch cord that had been tightly wound around both wrists, the free ends then tied behind her back. She had blunt injuries to her anus and vagina. Those wounds, which were bloodless, likely had occurred after she had breathed her last. Her cause of death was determined to be 6 blunt force wounds to her head. Lori, though not bound, also likely died early in the attack. She and Michelle had been struck while still in their cots and appeared to have been similarly violated. Denise, the only black child among the 3, was a different story. She had been strangled. The autopsy also revealed bruising around her vagina where leaves and twigs had been shoved. The medical examiner said that extraordinary efforts were made to extract fingerprints from the sleeping bags, from the tent, and from the girls' bodies, all to no avail. Likewise, Hoffman said he tried to find semen in or on the girls' bodies, also to no avail. Authorities found a few hairs consistent with Native American origin, not surprising given that the camp sat on Cherokee land. Hoffman went on to estimate that the time of death was between 4 and 5 a.m. that Sunday morning, though he said Denise may have been alive just before 6 o'clock. As he was informing the world of their deaths, their Kiowa Girl Scout sisters and the 3 Kiowa counselors were being driven back down to Cookie Trail Road to go back into their tents and try to identify if anything they had brought with them was now missing. Evidence up until now had been scant. Maybe the Girl Scouts could nail the bastard. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Butcher Box. Grilling season is fully here, and we have big ambitions this summer. And the one thing that's going to make it easier is actually having good meat on hand.
That's where Butcher Box comes in. They deliver over 100 premium protein options straight to your door. Grass-fed beef, wild-caught seafood, you name it. All raised and sourced the right way. No antibiotics, no added hormones, no fillers.
And it's flexible. You can customize your box based on what you actually want to cook. I've been stocking up on chicken and ground beef in anticipation of us running a summer cookout operation over here. But the quality is genuinely on another level compared to what's at the grocery store.
Better meat means better flavor, fewer mistakes on the grill, and honestly, meals that live up to the moment, whether it's a quick weeknight dinner or a full weekend spread.
Plus, it ships free and you get recipes and grilling tips included. So whether you're a beginner or you think you're a grill master, like our neighbor Sean, you've got what you need.
Maybe I could be a grill master. As an exclusive offer, new listeners can get their choice between free ribeyes for a year or ground beef beef, or chicken breast for life. Plus $20 off when you go to butcherbox.com/COTC.
That's your choice of ribeyes for a year or ground beef or chicken breast for life, plus $20 off your first box and free shipping always. That's butcherbox.com/COTC. Don't forget to use our link so they know we sent you. The town of Locust Grove covers just about 1 square mile. It was here that the Trail of Tears ended for some of the Cherokee Nation when they were forcibly resettled in the 1830s. The town is located in Mayes County within the 7,000 square mile Cherokee Nation jurisdictional area in northeastern Oklahoma. In the early 1970s, remember this crime took place in mid-1977, the American Indian movement forced a public reckoning over centuries of crimes against Native Americans, some of its members calling it nothing short of a genocide. At Wounded Knee, South Dakota, and on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay, AIM protesters made their demands impossible to ignore. An end to the systemic poverty, deliberate neglect, and police brutality their communities had endured for generations. AIM protesters made their demands impossible to ignore. The movement notched real legal wins. Land returned, tribal sovereignty strengthened, federal policy forced to shift in ways that, while still inadequate, represented genuine progress toward recognizing Native American culture and rights. And that tension, that history, cast a long shadow over what was about to become the largest manhunt in Oklahoma history. More than 500 law officers and volunteers fanning out across the county to find a single murder suspect, a full-blooded Cherokee who had grown up in these very woods. When the Girl Scouts and their counselors went back on June 14th to account for their belongings, Susan Emery found that she was short a handmade purse, which contained sunglasses in a tan plastic case, a wallet, and some money. Carla Wilhat was missing a pair of glasses. Karen Mitchell, a counselor from the Choctaw unit of Camp Scott, said she had had a mirror and clay pipe taken from inside her bunk trunk, something she hadn't discovered until after the trunk had been in possession of the Mayes County Sheriff's Office and returned to her. All of these items had been on the bedsides of the teenagers. Presumably, whoever took them had entered their tents and boldly lifted what he wanted while they slept. Weaver's decision to focus on Jean Leroy Hart was understandable. In June of 1966, Hart had taken 2 women from the parking lot of a Tulsa bar and drove them a half hour down the road to Mayes County, where he raped and sodomized at least one of them. He was able to control the women by placing one in his trunk while he assaulted the other. Afterward, he tied them to a tree with rope and left them to die. Strangely, he made a show of trying on their glasses to see if maybe they could improve his own vision. He pleaded guilty to those charges and received a 3 to 10-year sentence, but was paroled after just 28 months. Upon getting out, he became a burglar, robbing an assortment of hunting shacks in the area, crimes that were frequently unreported. When he was finally caught, items from previous burglaries were found on him or where he stayed. Many of those items had been taken off the bedside tables of sleeping victims. And because he was on parole when he committed those crimes, Hart was no longer afforded leniency. He was given a prison sentence range of between 145 to 305 years. Now, I won't comment on the insanity and misogyny of giving him just 10 years for rape and 305 years for taking people's stuff. Anyway, Hart went back to Weaver's Mayes County Jail for a hearing in 1973. He managed to escape from custody while there, only to be caught 10 days later. Upon his return to jail, he escaped again, and this time he wasn't caught. He managed to hide in plain sight for 4 years. Here's Tulsa World reporter Tim Stanley in a Hulu documentary called Keeper of the Ashes: The Oklahoma Girl Scout Murders.
The maddening thing for authorities was that he stayed in the Locust Grove area almost as if he had no fear of the authorities ever taking him back. I mean, many of them will say, it was no big thing to look up and see Gene in town. He would be there 1 minute, you'd turn your back, and then he'd be gone. Legend developed around him, the guy that they never could catch, thumbing his nose at the authorities, painting them out to be buffoons.
So Gene, who was almost a legend in these parts, became the most likely suspect in law enforcement's eyes. It certainly helped that his mother, Ella Mae Buckskin, lived just a mile from Camp Scott. A few days after the murder, 2 local guys, Johnny Colvin and W.R. Thompson, sought out State Trooper Charlie Newton and told him they had been hunting and had come upon a cleft in the hill wall where they found signs that someone had been living there. There were flour sacks and cans of food, Band-Aids, and signs of cooking. Maybe it was Gene. OISB investigator Marty Wilson.
Inside the cave, they found several different things. Of the most significance, they found a piece of newspaper and a roll of masking tape. The newspaper that was found in that cave turned out to be the front and back page of Section C of the Tulsa World newspaper, the April 17, 1977 edition, which was the same section of newspaper that was found in the flashlight. An OSBI criminalist was able to fracture match the torn end on the masking tape to one of the torn ends of the masking tape that was on the flashlight. Among other items that were found were broken sunglasses in a beige vinyl case. When the camp counselors were interviewed, one of the counselors reported that she had some sunglasses missing from her tent. The sunglasses that were found in the cave belonged to her, and 2 photographs.
The pictures looked like they'd been taken at a wedding. The photos were made public in hopes that someone could recognize who the women in the pictures were and where the pictures had been taken. Bingo. They found that the wedding photos had been shot by a clerk at the Granite Reformatory, where useful skills were taught to those who might use them once they got out. And one of the darkroom apprentices at the time of the wedding was Gene Leroy Hart. It seemed a no-brainer. But Hart was still unfindable. Months passed. Frustrated and embarrassed, law enforcement officials hired highly trained tracking dogs from Pennsylvania who did remarkably good work running through the Oklahoma woods and alerting at various points, but they too became confused when the trail simply stopped. That prompted some locals to assume that Hart had used some kind of medicine man juju to shapeshift, to turn into an eagle at will to elude the law. The fact that 2 of those dogs died within a short period after their time in the Oklahoma woods solidified that theory. He could put curses on people or dogs. Nobody blinked. The manhunt soon became the largest ever in Oklahoma history as multiple agencies combed the woods and as undercover agents and tribal informants tried to pin down his whereabouts. Then the FBI stepped in. The cops figured they needed an insider to give him up. They finally found one 10 months later when OSBI agent Harvey Pratt, a member of the Cherokee tribe, convinced a well-respected native shaman that Hart had a better chance of being taken alive if he would tell where Hart was. The medicine man considered this and, after some thought, led authorities to a deserted hut he owned over in Cherokee County. On April 6, 1978, Hart was arrested while living in a tiny shack hidden deep in the Cookson Hills, south of Locust Grove. The Cookson Hills were known to be a notorious hideout for those running from the law. Its most notable temporary inhabitants included 30s bank robbers Clyde Barrow, Bonnie Parker, and Pretty Boy Floyd. Hart's manhunt had cost $2 million, or the equivalent of about $11 million in today's money. They would take no chances this time, holding him in a cell on Oklahoma's death row, a considerably tougher spot to slip out of. Besides, it seemed a fitting place for him, as most figured he would be there soon enough anyway. But Hart insisted he was innocent, telling the medicine man, the police, and his lawyers that he had not killed those little girls. And a lot of people believed him. From a news report at the time.
Usually in such cases, there are a lot of hard feelings. But many people here don't believe Hart did it.
No way, shape, form, or fashion. No way.
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Because I know Gene like I know me, and I'm not capable of that kind of crime, and Gene's not either.
The Native American population of Mays County especially rose to his defense. They openly held fundraisers, from fried chicken dinners to raffles, to pay for his lawyers. There was even a sign as you entered Locust Grove. It read, "Welcome to the Heart, H-A-R-T, of Gene, G-E-N-E, country." Kim Baker, one of Gene Hart's nieces, explained in an investigation discovery documentary,
"My family spoke of the case as being a railroaded situation. They believed that there was a decision made by the sheriff at the time that Gene had been the perpetrator based on the fact that Gene had been on the run for so long, that Gene had escaped within the context of the time. Cherokee community members supported my Uncle Gene as someone who was representing the struggle against injustice. That was and is still a big issue for us."
The parents of the 3 girls killed could barely contain their contempt for the community where their children had been slaughtered and what they believed was a fit of that man's animalistic rage. Their anger was only going to get worse. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Rula. Finding a therapist is hard enough, but finding one who actually takes your insurance? That's where so many people get stuck. And it's where I got stuck too before I found Rula. I checked it out and had a match within minutes. That's no exaggeration.
And that's kind of the whole point of Rula. They partner with over 100 insurance plans, so the average copay is just $15 per session. Real therapy from licensed professionals at a price that actually makes sense. You use your insurance for your physical health. Why wouldn't you use it for your mental health too?
What I also love is that Rula isn't just throwing you at the first available provider. They take your goals, your preferences, your background into account and give you a curated list of in-network therapists who are actually the right fit for you. No wait lists, no frustrating back and forth.
Appointments are available as soon as tomorrow. And Rula sticks with you throughout, checking in to make sure your care is actually moving you forward.
Thousands of people are already using Rula to get affordable, high-quality therapy that's actually covered by insurance. Visit rula.com/COTC to get started. That's RULA.com/COTC. You deserve mental health care that works with you, not against your budget. On March 19, 1979, 6 men and 6 women were seated in the Mays County courtroom to hear the capital murder case against Gene Leroy Hart. By now, the highly successful Tulsa District Attorney Buddy Fallis had been called in to help with the prosecutorial efforts. He wouldn't have normally stepped in, but it turned out that Mays County DA Sid Wise had already secured a deal to write a book about the murders. That meant he had a vested interest in the outcome of the trial and was thrown off the high-profile case. Side note, he never wrote that book. Local lawyer Gary Pitchlin teamed with a former public defender, Garvin Isaacs, to defend Hart. Both of Hart's attorneys were young and had Cherokee ancestry. Some imagined it was not a fair fight. The prosecution's case was largely circumstantial. They argued that the items found in the cave-like crevice, Susan's sunglasses, the roll of tape, linked Hart directly to the crime scene. Add in the wedding photos that trace back to his time in the reformatory darkroom, and they painted a hard-to-ignore picture for the jury. The defense responded to that find. Here's Hart's attorney, Gary Pitchlin.
What we discovered in talking to an officer from the Locust Grove Police Department is that those glasses had been in the property room after the initial search of the campgrounds. So how they got from there to the cave, if they were even in the cave, was one of those early questions that came up.
The prosecution had no fingerprints, but they leaned hard on hair evidence, claiming samples from the bodies and from Hart's head were a match. The defense disputed that. And it's worth noting that microscopic hair analysis has since been thoroughly discredited by the FBI itself. It was junk science then, we just didn't know it yet. A forensic expert testified that sperm found in Hart's underwear, seized from his jail cell, was consistent with decomposed sperm found on a pillowcase recovered near the girls' bodies. One OSBI crime lab expert confirmed it. Another testified she could not. The defense challenged both findings and pointed out that the original autopsies had found no semen on any of the girls themselves. The prosecution called an OSBI agent to the stand. On cross-examination, the defense asked whether the agent had posed for photos with Hart after his arrest, a sort of trophy shot at the end of a 10-month manhunt. The agent said no. The defense then produced photos of just that and entered them into evidence. So the jury now had photographic proof that an OSBI agent lied under oath. Then there was the matter of Karen Mitchell's trunk. You'll remember she was the counselor who'd had a mirror and clay pipe missing from inside it, items that had disappeared sometime after the trunk was seized by the Mays County Sheriff's Office. It was when the trunk was returned that the items were missing. They later turned up again on Pratt's property, that's the medicine man. Well, he testified that he had never even seen those items until authorities said they had found them among his things. And then, about those wedding photographs so conveniently found at the cave, Alan Little, a former jailer who worked in the Mays County Sheriff's Office, testified that those pictures were in Pete Weaver's desk when Hart broke out of jail the second time. He said that Weaver hated Hart, and he would pull out the pictures and throw them on the desk, saying he'd get that SOB if it was the last thing he ever did. Oh my. Little had one more thing to add. He testified that a dispatcher in the sheriff's office had told him the word was out. The man who brought Hart in alive wouldn't have a job later. Oof. Now that might have been enough for the jury, but the defense didn't stop there. They offered the jury an alternative suspect entirely. A Kansas man named William Stevens, already serving time for rape. An 11-year-old Girl Scout testified she had seen a man matching Stevens' description lurking outside her tent just days before the murder. Another witness testified that Stevens and a friend had borrowed a flashlight weeks before the murders, a flashlight later found near the girls' bodies. OSBI Director Tom Kennedy said investigators had already taken samples from Stevens in prison and ruled him out. But the jury had now heard that someone else had been considered, investigated, and, depending on whom you believed, either cleared or quietly set aside. When the testifying was over, the jury was only out for 6 hours. They came back with 3 identical verdicts on the 3 charges of murder. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. Much later, juror Leela Ramsey would be asked about this.
We felt like there was a lot of manufactured evidence, a lot of sloppiness in the procedure.
And this about the OSBI agent answering about the pictures they had taken, gloating over their capture of Hart.
He was talking to the jury, and Garvin Isaacs asked him, said, were any pictures taken the day over there when they arrested Gene Hart? And he said, no, not any. He said, you didn't take any pictures? And they said, no. We're sitting here looking at 8x10 glossies of that very man posed like he'd bagged a big game. He lied to us.
It looks very much like Sheriff Peter Weaver had planted evidence to frame Gene Hart, whether Hart had done it or not. And to be clear, the jury wasn't convinced of his innocence. They were simply convinced the prosecution hadn't proved his guilt.
I'm not saying he's not guilty, but I am saying that the evidence showed he was not one person done by themselves. We all 12 agreed on that.
So yeah, it had gone well for the defense, but nothing that had taken place that early spring in a Mays County courthouse changed Hart's fate. He was swiftly returned to McAllister State Prison to serve out his previous 300-ish year sentence for parole violations and a rash of burglaries. 9 weeks later, on June 4th, 1979, Hart collapsed after jogging around the prison yard and died. He was only 35. His autopsy would show he had arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease, severe. It found no poisons in his blood, his gut, or his urine. In short, he had died of a plain old heart attack. Hart's funeral was attended by 1,000 mourners, according to press reports at the time, making it the largest ever gathering in tiny Locust Grove, Oklahoma. The decidedly divided populace of Oklahoma either saw the whole thing as God's rightful striking down of the murderer or a continuation of the conspiracy against him and his people. That second bunch wondered aloud why no one in law enforcement was trying to find out who really had battered and destroyed those little innocent children. Law enforcement, for its part, said they had found the killer and they need not look any further. The case remained open, but only in the sense that no one was convicted of it. For all other intents and purposes, it was closed. But was it really? Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Quince. There is something about summer that makes you really appreciate good bedding, and that's when I started paying more attention to what we were actually sleeping on.
Quince makes high-quality bedding from materials like 100% European linen and organic cotton, and the difference is genuinely easy to feel. Their organic cotton sheets are breathable and perfect for warm nights.
They've got everything you need to make your bed feel cooler and lighter for summer. Sheets, linen shams, duvet covers. Plus, they have mulberry silk pillowcases and eye masks, which feel like such a small upgrade that makes a huge difference.
And the prices are wild. Everything at Quince is 50 to 80% less than comparable brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're paying for quality, not markup. That's just the smarter way to shop.
Seriously, if you've been sleeping on the same sheets for too long and wondering why you're waking up warm, this is your sign. I noticed the difference right away, and then even more after a few washes when everything got softer.
Make your summer bedding feel better. Go to quince.com/centuries for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/centuries for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/centuries.
Not everyone could leave the case of the Girl Scout killings alone. One man, in fact, got suspicious that very first day as the buses from Tulsa were pulling onto Cookie Trail Road to retrieve all those confused campers. Paul Smith, the former Tulsa police detective, had moved to Locust Grove to escape urban crime. He was a patrolman working in town that Sunday when he noticed a dark green Dodge Super Bee lingering around the Camp Scott entrance. It was the same car he had seen a few minutes earlier at the Get and Split convenience store, and he knew that 3 ne'er-do-wells named Bull, Buddy, and Flea were out cruising. They'd seemed high to him, acting especially crazy, secretive. Later, camp director Barbara Day would report having seen the car too when she was out and about. The next day, the Monday after the murders had been discovered, Smith found out that a teenager reported seeing Bull and Buddy walking barefoot and shirtless in that same area trying to hitch a ride. Smith pinned the girls' slayings on these 3 guys and found some really interesting circumstantial evidence that he tried for 40 years to convince others to look into and nail down. For one, the day after the murder, the familiar dark green muscle car was never seen again. Rumors, tips, and scuttlebutt had it that it had been pushed into the Neosho River. Smith asked why those dirt-poor young men would rid themselves of their only ride. For another, the day after the murder, Bull and Buddy got 2 airplane tickets to California, where Bull stayed with family members and Buddy hid out until Jean Leroy Hart had been charged with the crime. Smith told J.D. Morrison, the author of Shattered Justice, a book about the case, that the sister of one of the men had told him that he'd used a roofing hammer to bludgeon the girls. She had even given the hammer to Smith, who turned it over to Trooper Howard Berry. You might remember that name. He was the first man on the scene that terrible Sunday morning. Anyway, the sister said she assumed Berry had turned it over to the OSBI. If Barry did that, it seemed no one was interested. Smith was really invested in this case, so much so that he hired a private investigator named Ted LaTurner to help him. The PI turned up 3 completely different suspects: Sonny James, Frank Justice, and Bill Stevens for the crime. Stevens, you'll remember, came up in trial. Police said he was excluded. By the time LaTurner raised his name again, he had died by suicide. As for the other 2 PI suspects, Sonny James was in prison and Frank Justice was also dead. So why would law enforcement decide not to hear Smith out after his PI fines? Well, it could come down to politics. In 1979, 2 years after the death of Lori, Michelle, and Denise, Paul Smith had bested Sheriff Pete Weaver in an election for Mays County Sheriff. On his first day in office, he had asked for the Camp Scott file and, come to find out, the sheriff's office said they didn't have such a thing. Bizarrely enough, neither did the Mays County District Attorney's Office. Now, as reported by Tapatalk.com, an admittedly thin Tulsa website devoted to the case, Frank Sordahl, the assistant district attorney in 1979, supposedly told Smith, "Sheriff, you'll never see those investigation files, and you will never get any cooperation from this office if you choose to pursue the Girl Scout murders case." Smith then apparently went to the Oklahoma Attorney General and asked that the Mays County DA's office be investigated for obstructing justice. He was told they would pursue the issue. They didn't. It's a matter now of Oklahoma conspiracy talk. Who killed the girls, and why did no one in authority want to look further than Gene Leroy Hart? If they ruled out William Smith as a lone culprit, did they ever consider him an accomplice? I don't know the answers to that. The killer may well have been Hart. Despite being a solid kid growing up, he had done plenty of bad things that made his inclusion into the murder inquiry a reasonable one. But where was the evidence? Why was the case so weak that it seemed some items might have been planted to bolster it? Had the terrain and the magnitude of the crime overwhelmed every law enforcement officer in the entire state? Well, in recent years, when people started making documentaries about famous murders, Mays County's new sheriff, Mike Reed, has been out front and quite vocal about his belief that law enforcement had the right man almost 50 years ago. He even went through all the evidence at hand. Evidence, you might recall, that former Sheriff Smith couldn't track down. Reed apparently found it and thought it deserved a look. Through various efforts, including the attention of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Reed turned over some old evidence to OSBI's Forensic Science Services for retesting. A lot of old evidence. OSBI's division director, Andrea Fielding, told reporters that up until 2013, her office had only been asked to look at a single item for DNA analysis in this case. Thanks to Reed, she was now faced with 400 pieces of evidence. It would be a huge undertaking, so expensive that Reed had to hold a private fundraising effort to afford it. Much of what Fielding looked at was degraded as the ensuing years had taken their toll. But once the testing was done, she reported back to Reed that in terms of DNA testing, every suspect she had been asked to compare was excluded except for one: Gene Leroy Hart. Local media took a giant leap now and announced that the case was solved. It wasn't. And true, Hart was not excluded, but he wasn't exclusively included either. The sometimes insular intermarrying history among the Cherokee had made sure of that. Plus, it was hard to trust the sample provided when we already know that some of the evidence in this case had been planted. So Fielding did not say Hart did it. A woman of science, she tried hard to explain that Hart's DNA matched on 3 of 5 important markers, but had not matched on 2 others. It would not be good enough for most scientists to draw any conclusions. But it was good enough for Reed and for Bo Farmer, Lori's father, who was a medical doctor. Reporting in 2017, local KJRH TV anchor Karen Larson spoke to Dr. Farmer.
When DNA testing became available years later, it pointed to Hart, but wasn't conclusive. Though Dr. Farmer, with his medical experience, is certain Hart was the killer.
My only question is that was he the only one? The things that were done that night, it's hard to believe that one person could do that.
Camps got closed on June 13th, 1977, and never welcomed another Girl Scout. The Girl Scouts sold the land not long after to a private family. Sometimes hunting is allowed on the property. Other than that, every remnant of its previous life has been reclaimed by nature. That may be healing for some, but not for Betty Milner. Holding a picture of her beloved Denise, she says she's greeted daily by an image of her smiling child from her bedside table. She told the Tulsa World in 2022 that every time she looks outside, she still wonders how the world can go on without Denise in it.
The answers won't solve anything for me. You hear lots about closure, but how can you have closure for something like that? The answers probably will only make it worse in a way, because then right now I feel like I already know too much about what she went through.
The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation still, technically, considers the case open. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read Shattered Justice, The Oklahoma Girl Scout Murders by J.D. Morrison. She watched the 2020 episode about the case and the 4-part series by ABC that featured Broadway actress Kristen Chenoweth. Amber also read contemporaneous news coverage and watched retrospective broadcasts about the investigation. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Head to www.grabbagcollab.com for exclusive content related to this show and access to other series on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this case was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and sometimes my child, Hunt Van Benscoten. Other music comes from Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, please help us out by rating and reviewing on Apple Podcasts. Also tell your friends. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com. On Instagram, we're @centuriespod, and you can find us on the Crimes of the Centuries Facebook page.